Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to the very active members of the regional group who enabled us to reach a quorum. The first thing I'd like to say at this afternoon's meeting is that I call to order the third meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. I would like to tell you that all of the comments and considerations expressed this morning were all extremely valuable, and they will all be taken into account. And we always attempt to remain transparent, to have consensus, and the commitment of the members of the Open-Ended Working Group. Let's move on to item 7, other matters. I invite the Open-Ended Working Group to resume its consideration of Agenda Item 7, entitled Other Matters, and the focus areas for the 12th session of the Working Group. On this point, I'd like to know that the priority areas selected for the 12th session of the Working Group are economic security and the contribution of older persons to sustainable development. That being said, I would like to remind you that these two priority or focus areas for the 12th session were circulated by members of the Bureau to member states for your consideration in due time based on the no objection rule in February of 2020. There's minutes from February 2020, and since we did not receive any objection from member states, the selected focus areas for the 12th session of the working group are the ones I have just mentioned. That is economic security and the contribution of older persons to sustainable development. Does any delegation wish to make any comment? Very well, thank you. Then the Open-Ended Working Group has thus concluded its consideration of Agenda Item 7. Item 8. I now invite the Open-Ended Working Group to turn to Agenda Item 8, entitled Provisional Agenda for the 12th Session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. Does any delegation have any comment to make? As there are no comments, the Open-Ended Working Group has thus concluded its consideration of Agenda Item 8. Let us turn to Item 9 on our agenda. I now invite the Working Group to turn to Agenda Item 9, entitled Adoption of the Report. I wish to inform delegations that I will finalize the Chair's summary of the key points of the discussions for next week, and that Chair's summary will be circulated by the Bureau to all delegations and will be included in the final report on the session before submission. Does anyone wish to make any comments? No comments? Very well. We'll be able to hear our rapporteur. And why do I say that? Well, because in today's journal, the draft report of the working group on the 11th session appears in document A/AC.72 2021 L1, which you have before you. And I now give the floor to our distinguished rapporteur, René Abbe-Degana, to introduce the report.
Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, I have the honor to present the draft report of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging for the purpose of strengthening the protection of the human rights of older persons on its 11th session, contained in document A/AC 278/2021/L1, which is now before the working group. The report before you contains information on the organizational part of our 11th session and will be updated and completed as required. In addition, the proceeding of today's meetings in the morning and in the afternoon will be reflected in the final report. The Chair's summary of the key points of the discussions during the 11th session will also be incorporated in the final report in due time. With regard to Section B on attendance, I should like to point out that those delegations who have provided information on their participation are currently registered in the provisional list of participants, which is available on the website of the working group. Delegations that do not appear on the list, or those who wish to make corrections to the list, are kindly requested to do so on e-delegate no later than Tuesday, 5th April 2021. With that, Madam Chair, I commend this draft report to the open-ended working group for its adoption. Thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the distinguished rapporteur. Does anyone have any comments to make? As there are no comments, may I take it that the open-ended working group is ready to adopt the draft report on its 11th session and entrust the Chair and the Bureau to finalize it with the assistance of the Secretariat? I hear no objection. It is so decided. The open-ended working group thus has concluded its consideration of Agenda Item 9. Distinguished delegates, we have come to the end of the 11th session. I would like to make a few closing comments. I'd like to express a special thanks to all delegates, UN representatives, NGO representatives, representatives of civil society and human rights representatives. I would also particularly like to thank the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Volkan Bozkir, the ASG for Human Rights, Ms. Keris, and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Michelle Bachelet, for having been with us here at the opening session. I'd like to extend my deepest thanks to all the members, UN agencies, national human rights institutions, and civil society organizations for their presence and their active participation at this session. Similarly, we welcome the substantive contributions made by panelists and moderators to our discussions, and we thank them for being with us and for their excellent briefings. I would like to refer particularly to the interactive exchange in the panels and this morning. It is precisely through open, inclusive, and constructive dialogue, which includes all relevant actors, that we can move forward in fulfilling our mandate. I wish to appeal to member states yet again to increase their participation in our discussions so that we can have even greater representativity and include the points of views of all regions. I thank very much representatives from civil society and national human rights institutions for their presence and for their constructive contributions to the mandate of the working group. Allow me once again to extend a few words of thanks to members of the Bureau and the entire Secretariat for their support and professionalism. Our deepest thanks are also extended to the conference officers, the interpreters, who really have done excellent work. Distinguished delegates, I'd like to make a few specific comments on results of this session. In our general discussion, I would like to highlight the important ministerial participation, which enabled us to learn of the great number of measures being adopted by countries to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on older persons and to reflect on the challenges we are facing in order to fully protect their rights on an equal footing with others. Similarly, in the high-level panel on COVID and older persons, we looked in depth from an interregional and multi-sectoral perspective at the enormous impact of the pandemic on older persons worldwide and the challenges of legal gaps in protecting their rights. At this session, we also had an opportunity to address two crucially important issues which directly impact older persons' enjoyment of human rights, namely the right to work and access to the labour market and access to justice. We discussed the current status of the international legal framework, and we identified existing gaps, sharing best practices and reflecting about possible new measures to tackle such shortcomings. We've had a fruitful and enriching exchange among distinguished experts, authorities, moderators, and all relevant stakeholders. We also followed through on priority areas discussed at the 10th session: education, training, continuous learning, and capacity building, as well as social protection and social security, including minimal levels of social protection. We considered normative options which would enable us to tackle the challenges identified at the last session. The discussions we had with all the panelists were very enriching, and I have a few basic ideas to share with you. COVID-19, the crisis of COVID-19, is not just a health and socioeconomic crisis, but it is a human rights crisis. And as such, COVID-19 has shown how much is being done by states, in particular by developing countries, who have had to act very urgently, not just to protect health and the life of their people, but also to mitigate the serious socio-economic consequences worldwide. It became clear how important it is to have states which are aware and who put the most vulnerable groups at the heart of their actions, those who are being left behind. We also saw how clear it was that access to vaccines saves lives, and that's a central element in any recovery. It's crucial to highlight that any initiative to facilitate universal and fair access to medication, treatment, vaccinations, and other health technologies must be a global public good, and the COVID-19 vaccine must also be a global public good. Discussions throughout the 11th session in the working group also made it clear that the serious consequences that legal gaps have and will continue to have on fully protecting the human rights of all older persons on an equal footing. Civil society and national human rights institutions unanimously pointed to the extreme need to have a legally binding international instrument to guarantee full protection of human rights of older persons, and several member states expressed similar views. The greatest commitment of Agenda 2030 is to leave no one behind, and we must therefore redouble our efforts to ensure the full enjoyment of the rights of all older persons, guaranteed by all states. This is a universal challenge, and therefore we must work together to tackle it. The open-ended working group on aging has always played a crucial role in promoting, defending, and protecting human rights of older persons. We've always shouldered an enormous responsibility, and today our responsibility is enormous. The pandemic has shown us that we will face major challenges in the future requiring everyone's commitment. I wish to conclude by quoting Pope Francis: "May we not forget the elderly who died from lack of respirators, partly as a result of healthcare systems dismantled year after year. I hope that so much pain is not useless, that we take a leap towards a new way of life and definitely discover that we need and owe each other, so that humanity is reborn with all faces, all hands, and all voices beyond the borders we have created." To each and every one of you, particularly those of you who are here with us this afternoon, those who took the effort to come here to make sure that we had a quorum. To everyone who has been here with us, thank you very much for your support during this session. Before I adjourn the meeting, I would like to draw delegates' attention to the letter distributed on the 26th of February 2021 on security and health for this session, including the possibility of continuing in these unfortunate circumstances if COVID-19 continues, as we have done in recent meetings. The Secretariat will organize the dismissal from the room. And therefore, members of delegations, please remain seated after I adjourn the meeting. The open-ended working group on aging at its 11th session is now concluded. Thank you.